Hey friend, welcome to Sleepy History Universe. Tonight we're stepping into the quiet, candlelit world of history, where every story unfolds at a gentle pace, helping you relax, unwind, and slowly drift off to sleep. If this channel becomes a place you enjoy returning to, where the calm storytelling and slow rhythm help make your evenings a little more peaceful, I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to subscribe. It truly helps the channel grow and allows me to bring you many more relaxing journeys through history. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's travel back in time together. Tonight, we're opening the doors to one of the most luxurious worlds the British Empire ever knew. Imagine waking beneath silk curtains while servants quietly prepare your breakfast downstairs. Picture strolling through endless gardens that belong entirely to your family, dining beneath crystal chandeliers, and living in a mansion so enormous that you've never even explored every room. But behind the glittering silver, elegant ballrooms, and perfectly polished manners was a fascinating world few people ever experienced. Every day was carefully choreographed, every meal was a grand occasion, and every comfort was made possible by an invisible army of servants working tirelessly behind the scenes. So tonight, we'll leave the crowded streets of Victorian Britain behind and step through the gates of its grandest estates. We'll wander through magnificent halls, peaceful libraries, glowing conservatories, lavish dining rooms, and beautiful gardens, discovering what everyday life was really like for the filthy rich during Victorian England. So settle in, relax, and let the story begin. Imagine waking not to the shrill cry of an alarm clock or the demands of a crowded city street, but to the quiet knock of a valet or lady's maid drawing back heavy velvet curtains as pale English sunlight filtered through towering windows. Outside, perfectly trimmed gardens stretched into the distance, where gardeners had already been working for hours before you had even opened your eyes. Somewhere downstairs, a cook was overseeing breakfast while maids polished silver until it reflected like mirrors. This was everyday life for the wealthiest families during Victorian England, an age remembered for strict manners, industrial progress, and astonishing contrasts between unimaginable wealth and crushing poverty. While millions struggled in smoky factories or crowded slums, the richest families inhabited a world that seemed almost separate from reality itself. Their homes were not simply houses, but sprawling country estates with hundreds of rooms, private chapels, libraries larger than modern bookstores, art galleries, stables, greenhouses, lakes, and forests that belonged entirely to them. Ownership of thousands of acres was not uncommon, and some aristocrats could ride on horseback for hours without ever leaving their own land. Wealth during the Victorian era was measured not merely by money but by land titles, influence, and the number of servants quietly ensuring that life remained effortless. A gentleman or noblewoman was expected to do remarkably little physical work, for visible labour was considered unsuitable for those of high social standing. Instead, their days revolved around managing appearances, social obligations, charitable events, entertaining guests, and preserving family prestige that often stretched back centuries. Morning routines reflected this extraordinary comfort. Before breakfast, servants silently carried hot water upstairs because indoor plumbing remained uncommon even in grand homes. Baths were prepared by hand, clothing carefully laid out according to the day's schedule. and boots polished until they gleamed. A wealthy gentleman might require assistance simply to dress correctly, fastening layers of shirts, waistcoats, cravats, coats, gloves, and polished shoes. Ladies wore elaborate gowns supported by crinolines or bustles, often requiring maids to lace corsets tightly enough to create the fashionable silhouette expected by society. Hairstyling alone could consume an hour or more, involving curls, ribbons, jewels, combs, and fresh flowers depending on the occasion. Looking wealthy demanded constant effort, though almost none of that effort came from the wealthy themselves. Breakfast was often a lavish affair rather than a hurried meal. Large dining tables displayed silver coffee pots, porcelain tea sets, imported from China, fresh bread, butter, preserves, smoked fish, eggs, kidneys, sausages, cold meats, fruit, pastries, and sometimes even champagne for special guests. Meals were served course by liveried footmen trained to move almost invisibly through the room. Conversation remained polite and measured, avoiding vulgar subjects such as money, despite everyone knowing that wealth dominated every aspect of their lives. Newspapers arrived fresh each morning, allowing gentlemen to discuss politics, trade, colonial affairs, and Parliament, while ladies often spoke about upcoming balls, charitable committees, or invitations received from influential families. The Victorian upper class believed deeply in displaying refinement. Every room within a mansion communicated status through expensive furniture, carved from mahogany or walnut, Persian carpets covering polished floors, crystal chandeliers hanging overhead, marble fireplaces warming vast drawing rooms, and paintings collected from across Europe. Shelves overflowed with leather-bound books, although not every owner read them regularly. Grand pianos stood ready for evening performances, while walls displayed hunting trophies, ancient sculptures, and family portraits painted by celebrated artists. Even the smallest decorative object served as evidence of taste and prosperity. Visitors judged families not only by conversation, but by curtains, carpets, china, and the quality of silver displayed during dinner. Perhaps the greatest luxury of all was an army of servants. A truly wealthy household could employ dozens or even hundreds of people whose names the owners scarcely remembered. Butlers supervised wine cellars and formal dinners with military precision. Housekeepers controlled domestic staff. Footmen opened doors, carried luggage, and attended meals. Maids cleaned bedrooms, lit fireplaces, emptied chamber pots, and polished endless surfaces. Cooks directed bustling kitchens where meals worthy of royalty emerged several times each day. Kitchen maids chopped vegetables from dawn until nightfall. Laundry maids spent exhausting hours washing delicate fabrics by hand. Stable boys cared for horses, coachmen maintained elegant carriages, gardeners cultivated flowers throughout the seasons, gamekeepers protected hunting grounds, tutors educated children, governesses instructed daughters in manners and languages, and valets attended exclusively to the personal needs of gentlemen. Behind every effortless moment enjoyed by the wealthy stood countless unseen hours of labour performed by people who rarely shared the comforts they created. Afternoons often unfolded according to carefully planned rituals. Gentlemen might inspect farms, meet estate managers, discuss investments linked to factories or railways, or participate in fox hunting across the countryside. Although many aristocrats inherited fortunes, increasing numbers of wealthy Victorians built immense fortunes through industry, banking, shipping, mining, textiles, and international trade. The Industrial Revolution transformed Britain into an economic powerhouse, creating businessmen whose fortunes rivaled ancient noble families. Some old aristocrats initially viewed these newly rich industrialists with suspicion, yet immense wealth gradually opened doors into elite society. Magnificent townhouses appeared in London's fashionable districts, alongside ancient family mansions, reflecting a changing world where money increasingly rivaled inherited titles. For wealthy women, afternoons revolved around an equally structured social calendar. Calls upon friends, elaborate tea gatherings, shopping excursions accompanied by servants, visits to museums or galleries, and charitable fundraising occupied much of their time. Charity held enormous importance because public generosity reinforced respectability. Wealthy ladies organized hospitals, schools, orphanages, and church events, though these acts often existed alongside an unquestioned acceptance of profound social inequality. Fashion also consumed considerable attention. Paris influenced clothing trends, and the richest women ordered gowns sewn from silk, velvet, lace, satin, and embroidered fabrics imported from across Europe. Jewelry boxes contained diamonds from South Africa, pearls from distant seas, emeralds, sapphires, and rubies that glittered beneath gaslight during evening events. Children of the wealthy experienced lives very different from ordinary Victorian youngsters. Sons usually received education from private tutors before attending prestigious boarding schools such as Eton or Harrow, where they prepared for careers in politics, the military, law, or managing family estates. Daughters studied music, drawing, French, literature, etiquette, dancing, and needlework under governesses, hired specifically for their refinement. Childhood involved nurseries, filled with toys, pony rides across private estates, carefully supervised games, and holidays at seaside resorts. Yet affection between parents and children sometimes remained surprisingly formal. Nannies often spent more time with young children than mothers did, reflecting Victorian ideas about class and household management. Travel represented another extraordinary privilege. Long before automobiles became common, wealthy Victorians journeyed in luxurious horse-drawn carriages, private railway compartments, or even personal railway coaches attached to scheduled trains. They vacationed in Scotland during shooting season, visited elegant spa towns, toured Italy, Switzerland, France, and Egypt, or escaped London's smoky air by retreating to enormous country estates. Steamships connected Britain with its vast empire, allowing adventurous elites to travel farther than previous generations could have imagined. Exotic souvenirs from India, China, Africa, and the Middle East filled drawing rooms, serving as reminders of Britain's global reach and imperial confidence. Dinner stood at the centre of elite social life. Preparations began hours before guests arrived. Tables glittered beneath candlelight, reflected through crystal glasses and polished silver. Fresh flowers decorated every corner. Multi-course meals unfolded with almost theatrical precision, beginning perhaps with soup before progressing through fish, roasted meats, game birds, vegetables, puddings, desserts, cheeses, and fruit. French cuisine dominated fashionable dining, and accomplished chefs enjoyed remarkable prestige. Wines from France, Portugal, and Spain accompanied each course according to strict etiquette. Every fork, spoon, and glass occupied an exact position, while servants appeared almost magically whenever a plate required changing. Good manners mattered as much as good food. One careless remark or breach of etiquette could become the subject of conversation across London's drawing rooms for weeks. Evenings often extended into elegant entertainment. Balls filled magnificent halls where orchestras played waltzes beneath dazzling chandeliers. Guests danced until early morning while elaborate gowns swept across polished floors. Imagine beginning another quiet morning in Victorian England as one of the nation's wealthiest individuals, where even silence carried the unmistakable sound of privilege. Before your eyes had fully opened, someone else had already lit the fire, warmed the room, drawn the curtains, brushed your clothes, prepared your bath, polished your boots, and ensured that every detail of the coming day unfolded exactly as expected. Wealth during Queen Victoria's reign was not merely about owning expensive possessions. It was about living in a world where inconvenience had almost disappeared. Time itself became your greatest luxury, because nearly every unpleasant task had been quietly handed to someone else. While factory whistles echoed across Britain's industrial cities, and thousands of workers hurried through rain and smoke toward exhausting shifts, the upper class awoke slowly beneath embroidered canopies, wrapped in fine linen sheets imported from Ireland or France, surrounded by carved oak furniture that had remained in the family for generations. Their bedrooms were often so large that they resembled modern apartments, decorated with hand-painted ceilings, silk wallpaper, marble fireplaces, and enormous windows overlooking gardens that required dozens of gardeners to maintain. Fresh flowers appeared every morning, without anyone ever asking where they came from. The scent of roses, lilies, and lavender drifted through hallways, while servants quietly removed yesterday's arrangements before anyone noticed they had begun to wilt. The mansion itself seemed almost alive. Long before sunrise, dozens of servants had already begun their routines. Coal fires needed constant attention throughout the house, because every occupied room required warmth. Lamps were cleaned and refilled. Carpets were beaten outdoors. Silverware was polished until it reflected faces like mirrors. Floors were swept, windows cleaned, curtains straightened, and breakfast preparations filled kitchens with the aroma of fresh bread, roasted meats, and coffee imported from distant colonies. In the servants' quarters, people worked quickly but almost silently, for the greatest compliment a servant could receive was to remain nearly invisible. The wealthy expected perfection but rarely acknowledged the effort required to achieve it. If a room appeared spotless, that was simply how it should be. If dinner arrived exactly on time, that was expected. Invisible excellence became the daily standard. Owning one grand estate was impressive enough, but many aristocratic families possessed several residences scattered across Britain: a London townhouse for the social season, a vast country manor for hunting, a Scottish castle for summer, perhaps a coastal villa for holidays, and smaller hunting lodges or inherited family homes completed an extraordinary portfolio of property. Each residence required its own staff, furniture, horses, kitchens, gardens, and maintenance. When the family decided to travel between homes, preparations sometimes began days in advance. Furniture covers were removed, fireplaces lit, bedrooms aired, kitchens stocked, and local servants informed of the family's arrival. By the time the carriage rolled through the estate gates, The house looked as though it had been occupied all along. Moving around such enormous homes could itself become an adventure. Endless hallways stretched beneath ornate ceilings, decorated with painted angels and mythological scenes. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched silently from richly carved frames, reminding every visitor that the family's influence stretched back centuries. Libraries contained thousands of leather-bound volumes arranged with almost military precision. Some collections were so valuable that scholars requested permission simply to study them. Music rooms housed grand pianos imported from Germany alongside violins, harps, and sheet music collected during European tours. Conservatories overflowed with tropical plants gathered from every corner of the British Empire, where heated glass houses allowed exotic orchids, palms, bananas, and rare flowers to flourish despite England's cool climate. The Victorian elite delighted in collecting objects that demonstrated both wealth and education. Cabinets displayed ancient Roman coins, Egyptian statues, Greek pottery, Chinese porcelain, Japanese lacquerware, Persian carpets, Indian ivory carvings, African sculptures, and rare fossils uncovered by amateur collectors. Entire rooms became museums reflecting Britain's global reach. Dinner guests wandered through these collections while hosts casually explained how a marble bust had been acquired during a visit to Italy, or how a magnificent vase had arrived from China aboard one of the family's trading ships. Every object told a story, but it also quietly reminded visitors of the owner's influence, connections, and financial power. Servants formed a carefully organized hierarchy that resembled a small corporation. At the very top stood the butler, a figure of immense authority who managed expensive wine collections, formal dinners, valuable silver, and the household's male servants. The housekeepers supervised female staff with equal discipline, maintaining inventories of linens, candles, soaps, cleaning supplies, and countless domestic necessities. Below them worked footmen, valets, ladies' maids, chambermaids, cooks, kitchen maids, laundresses, gardeners, coachmen, stable boys, gamekeepers, dairy maids, nursery maids, governesses, tutors, and countless others whose duties rarely overlapped. Every servant understood exactly where they stood within this invisible social ladder. Promotions were possible, but required years of loyal service, spotless references, and impeccable conduct. The owners themselves often knew senior servants well enough to greet them by name, but remained distant from the dozens of junior employees who maintained the household behind the scenes. Meals occupied astonishing amounts of time and attention. Breakfast remained leisurely, lunch refined, afternoon tea almost sacred, dinner spectacular, and supper available for guests who lingered into the night. The Victorian obsession with etiquette reached extraordinary levels around the dining table. Guests learned which fork belonged to each course, how to fold napkins correctly when conversation should pause for servants to replace plates, and even how loudly soup ought to be consumed. A single formal dinner might include oysters, clear soup, salmon, roast lamb, pheasant, venison, asparagus, potatoes prepared in multiple styles, elaborate puddings, fresh fruits, imported cheeses, chocolates, crystallized fruits, nuts, coffee, fine wines, and expensive cigars served afterward in separate smoking rooms. Entire kitchens operated with military precision to ensure every dish reached the table at precisely the correct temperature. Wine cellars beneath great houses often contained thousands of bottles collected across decades, Some aristocrats prided themselves on offering wines older than their guests: French Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, Portuguese port, Spanish sherry, German Riesling, and Hungarian Tokaji rested in carefully controlled conditions beneath stone vaults. The butler alone frequently possessed the keys, guarding collections worth fortunes. Gentlemen discussed vintages with remarkable seriousness, sometimes identifying the exact vineyard simply by taste. Entertainment rarely depended upon modern technology, because the wealthy created their own spectacles. House parties lasting an entire week gathered politicians, artists, military officers, explorers, bishops, writers, scientists, and members of the royal court beneath one roof. Every day followed a carefully orchestrated schedule. Breakfast flowed into horseback riding, followed by shooting parties, fishing excursions, lawn games, afternoon tea, musical rehearsals, formal dinners, dancing, amateur theatrical performances, card games, and midnight conversations beside crackling fireplaces. Guests dressed several times each day because every activity required different clothing. Riding habits differed from afternoon dresses, which differed from dinner gowns, which differed from evening ball attire. A wealthy woman travelling for only a week might pack dozens of outfits, accompanied by trunks filled with hats, gloves, shoes, jewellery, cosmetics, and accessories. Fox hunting represented one of the defining passions of aristocratic life. Entire communities organised elaborate hunts across private estates, where riders dressed in bright scarlet coats pursued foxes alongside packs of specially bred hounds. The event served as much as a social gathering as a sporting competition. Families displayed magnificent horses bred over generations, while spectators admired riders whose confidence reflected years of expensive training. Afterwards, exhausted participants returned home for lavish meals and lively discussions recounting every thrilling moment. Not every wealthy Victorian inherited noble titles. The Industrial Revolution created a remarkable new class of millionaires whose fortunes emerged from steel mills, cotton factories, railroads, shipping companies, insurance firms, coal mines, engineering works, banking houses, and global trade. These industrial magnates often built mansions rivaling ancient castles, filling them with every luxury money could buy. Yet despite their wealth, some older aristocrats quietly viewed them as outsiders whose money lacked the refinement of inherited nobility. Over time, however, marriages between old noble families and wealthy industrial dynasties became increasingly common, allowing titles and fortunes to strengthen one another. The social season in London became the highlight of elite life. For several months each year, Parliament met, drawing politicians and aristocrats into the capital. Imagine living in a world where your greatest concern was not how to earn money, but how to spend an endless fortune in a manner worthy of your family's name. For the wealthiest Victorians, money was so abundant that it often became almost invisible. Bills were rarely handled personally. Estate managers, accountants, solicitors, and private secretaries managed complicated finances, while enormous incomes quietly flowed in from farmland, coal mines, factories, railroads, shipping companies, overseas investments, rental properties, and colonial businesses scattered across the British Empire. Every sunrise brought fresh income without the owner lifting a finger. Tens of thousands of tenants, workers, merchants, and businessmen unknowingly contributed to fortunes that had been growing for generations. Some aristocrats earned more in a single week than an ordinary labourer might hope to earn in an entire lifetime. One of the greatest symbols of unimaginable wealth was the country estate itself. These were not merely homes surrounded by gardens, but entire self-contained worlds. A visitor approaching the mansion might travel for several miles, through forests, farmland, stone bridges, ornamental lakes, and carefully designed landscapes before finally reaching the front entrance. Long driveways curved deliberately so that the house appeared dramatically at the last possible moment. Architects and landscape designers worked together to create the perfect first impression. Artificial hills were built simply to improve the view. Rivers were redirected. Entire villages were relocated if they spoiled the scenery. Thousands of mature trees were transplanted across the estate, despite the enormous expense, because beauty itself became another display of power. The gardens surrounding these homes required armies of workers throughout the year. Perfect lawns were cut by hand with mechanical mowers, pushed for endless hours across acres of grass. Flower beds changed with every season, ensuring continuous colour from early spring until late autumn. Roses climbed stone walls. Exotic palms filled heated conservatories. Fountains sparkled beneath marble statues, and carefully trimmed hedges formed elaborate mazes where guests wandered after dinner. Rare flowers collected from India, South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia bloomed inside enormous glasshouses heated by underground boilers. Some estates became famous across Europe simply because they possessed plants that could not be found anywhere else. Owning horses represented another extraordinary luxury. The richest families maintained stables that rivaled modern luxury car collections. Hunters for fox hunting, elegant carriage horses, racing thoroughbreds, polo ponies, children's riding horses, and massive draft horses all occupied separate stalls attended by experienced grooms. Every animal received specialized diets, regular exercise, veterinary care, and careful grooming. Saddles, harnesses, riding boots, and silver-mounted equipment reflected astonishing craftsmanship. Gentlemen often discussed bloodlines with the same seriousness that others reserved for royal families. Winning prestigious horse races brought enormous prestige, and wealthy owners competed fiercely to breed faster, stronger, and more elegant animals. Transportation itself reflected social status. Before automobiles became common, magnificent horse-drawn carriages served as moving symbols of prestige. Open landaus carried elegantly dressed ladies through London's fashionable streets, while enclosed coaches protected wealthy families during long journeys. Some carriages featured gold, painted family crests, velvet interiors, polished brass fittings, and suspension systems designed for remarkable comfort. Coachmen dressed in elaborate uniforms complete with top hats and gloves, while footmen rode behind the carriage ready to assist passengers whenever they stopped. Merely arriving at a social event became a carefully staged performance designed to reinforce wealth and importance. Shopping for the upper class bore little resemblance to ordinary commerce. Wealthy ladies visited exclusive London establishments, where shopkeepers closed doors to ordinary customers and devoted their full attention to a single important client. Rolls of imported silk, velvet, lace, and satin covered enormous tables, while dressmakers sketched designs unique to each customer. hats decorated with feathers from exotic birds, gloves made from the softest leather, embroidered slippers, jeweled fans, French perfumes, handmade parasols, and delicate lace shawls accumulated almost effortlessly. Fashion changed rapidly, encouraging constant purchases. Wearing the same gown repeatedly at important social events risked attracting whispers among fashionable circles. Jewelry collections became astonishing demonstrations of inherited wealth. Entire safes overflowed with necklaces, tiaras, brooches, bracelets, rings, earrings, lockets, and jeweled hair ornaments accumulated across generations. Some pieces had belonged to ancestors who attended royal coronations centuries earlier. Diamonds mined in South Africa, Burmese rubies, Colombian emeralds, Sri Lankan sapphires, and natural pearls gathered from distant oceans sparkled beneath candlelight during evening receptions. Certain noble families possessed jewels so famous that newspapers described them whenever they appeared at royal ceremonies. Music filled many wealthy households almost every evening. Drawing rooms contained magnificent grand pianos crafted by Europe's finest manufacturers. Daughters spent countless hours mastering difficult compositions because musical talent enhanced marriage prospects and demonstrated refinement. Guests frequently gathered after dinner while family members performed classical works by Mozart, Beethoven, Mendelssohn, Chopin, or Schubert. Professional musicians occasionally visited private homes to perform intimate concerts unavailable to the general public. Wealthy patrons sometimes invited celebrated opera singers to entertain guests during exclusive house parties, creating unforgettable evenings far removed from ordinary Victorian life. Books occupied an equally important place within elite society. Large libraries symbolized intelligence as much as prosperity. Leather. Bound volumes stretched from floor to ceiling behind polished oak, shelves accessed by rolling ladders. Rare first editions rested beside illuminated medieval manuscripts and beautifully illustrated scientific works. Wealthy collectors purchased entire private libraries from struggling noble families, preserving thousands of valuable texts. Gentlemen often withdrew after dinner to smoke cigars, while debating philosophy, politics, exploration, archaeology, and scientific discoveries. Newspapers from across Europe arrived daily, ensuring that influential families remained informed about world affairs long before radio or television existed. Many aristocrats became enthusiastic travellers during the Victorian age. The famous Grand Tour, once reserved primarily for young noblemen, expanded into longer journeys across Europe and beyond. Wealthy families visited Venice's canals, Rome's ancient ruins, the snow-covered Alps of Switzerland, the palaces of Vienna, the museums of Paris, and the temples of Greece. Others ventured farther into Egypt, India, Japan, China, and the Middle East aboard luxurious steamships. Travel served not merely as entertainment but as education. Souvenirs returned home by the hundreds. Ancient coins, marble statues, silk fabrics, carved ivory, painted fans, Persian rugs, Egyptian mummies, Japanese ceramics, and exotic furniture transformed English mansions into miniature museums of the world. The Victorian obsession with collecting reached astonishing extremes. Some wealthy individuals dedicated entire wings of their homes to natural history collections containing stuffed birds, butterflies, insects, fossils, minerals, shells, and preserved animals from every continent. Others specialized in antique clocks, rare books, medieval armor, porcelain, paintings, sculptures, or historical weapons. Auction houses became battlegrounds where fortunes changed hands over single masterpieces. Winning the opportunity to own an important painting or ancient artifact brought immense satisfaction, because collecting reflected both wealth and cultural sophistication. Despite living lives of extraordinary comfort, the wealthy also faced constant pressure to entertain. Invitations flowed endlessly between influential households. Refusing too many invitations risked social isolation, while hosting disappointing events could damage family reputation. Preparing a grand ball sometimes required weeks of planning. Hundreds of invitations were handwritten. Musicians hired florists, transformed ballrooms into indoor gardens. Thousands of candles illuminated crystal chandeliers. Temporary kitchens expanded food production. Extra servants arrived from neighboring estates. Tailors, dressmakers, jewelers, and hairdressers worked around the clock, preparing hosts and guests alike. By evening, the house shimmered with light visible from miles away, while dozens of carriages lined the entrance waiting to deliver Britain's most influential men and women. Conversation itself became an essential social skill. A truly refined Victorian gentleman knew enough about literature, politics, science, travel, music, history, and art to engage almost anyone without appearing arrogant. Ladies cultivated similar abilities while carefully avoiding controversial subjects considered improper. Wit, charm, and graceful manners could elevate a family's reputation almost as effectively as wealth. Awkward silence represented a social failure. Elegant conversation flowed effortlessly across dinner tables illuminated by candlelight and surrounded by priceless works of art. Imagine stepping beyond the glittering drawing rooms and perfectly manicured gardens to witness another side of immense Victorian wealth, one that very few outsiders ever experienced. The richest families did not simply own beautiful houses. They possessed an entire way of life built upon generations of inherited privilege and an unwavering belief that their position at the top of society was both natural and permanent. From the moment a child was born into one of these great families, every aspect of life was carefully designed to reinforce that belief. A newborn might sleep in an elaborately decorated nursery, attended by a nanny, nursemaid, and nursery maids who worked in shifts to ensure the child was never left unattended. Silver rattles, handcrafted rocking horses, imported toys, and beautifully illustrated books surrounded children long before they could appreciate their value. Portrait artists were hired to capture every stage of childhood, creating paintings that would later hang in family galleries, alongside ancestors stretching back hundreds of years. Birthdays themselves became elaborate family occasions. Tables overflowed with cakes decorated in remarkable detail, imported sweets, handmade toys, books bound in fine leather, miniature furniture, dolls dressed in Parisian fashions, model ships, and mechanical toys powered by intricate clockwork. Guests arrived carrying gifts that reflected both affection and social expectations. Children wore their finest clothes, while musicians entertained throughout the afternoon. To an ordinary Victorian child, such celebrations would have seemed almost unimaginable. Education within wealthy households extended far beyond reading and mathematics. Young boys studied Latin and Greek, because educated gentlemen were expected to quote ancient philosophers with ease during conversation. They practiced fencing, boxing, horse riding, shooting, and public speaking, preparing for leadership within politics, the military, or diplomacy. Tutors encouraged confidence, discipline, and the quiet authority expected of future landowners. Girls received equally demanding instruction, though focused upon different expectations. They mastered French and Italian, practiced piano for several hours each day, painted delicate watercolors, embroidered astonishingly detailed patterns, memorized poetry, and perfected graceful manners. Dancing lessons taught them how to move elegantly across polished ballroom floors, while etiquette classes explained everything from introducing guests to arranging flowers properly. Animals occupied a cherished place within aristocratic life. Wealthy families often owned prized hunting dogs, elegant greyhounds, spaniels, terriers, parrots, imported from tropical colonies, peacocks wandering formal gardens, exotic birds housed in elaborate aviaries, and occasionally far more unusual creatures collected during overseas travels. Some estates even maintained small private zoos, containing monkeys, kangaroos, antelopes, or rare deer acquired through diplomatic gifts or adventurous expeditions. Children developed close relationships with these animals, and family portraits frequently included beloved pets sitting proudly beside their owners. The kitchens beneath great houses resembled bustling factories. Enormous cast iron stoves radiated constant heat, while cooks supervised teams of assistants preparing meals from dawn until long after midnight. Fresh fish arrived packed in ice from coastal towns. Game birds shot on the estate were plucked and prepared immediately. Beef, lamb, pork, and venison hung in cool storage rooms before being transformed into elaborate dishes. Bakers produced fresh bread several times each day, while pastry chefs crafted delicate desserts requiring extraordinary patience. Pantries overflowed with spices from India, tea from Ceylon, sugar from the Caribbean, coffee from Africa, chocolate from South America, and wines imported from nearly every important European vineyard. Nothing was purchased in small quantities. Flour arrived in massive sacks, butter by the barrel, fruit in crates, and meat in astonishing volumes, capable of feeding hundreds. Zone fascinating luxury enjoyed by the wealthy involved ice itself. Before electric refrigeration, enormous blocks of ice harvested during winter or imported from distant countries were stored inside specially designed underground ice houses, insulated with straw and sawdust. Throughout summer, these frozen reserves cooled desserts, preserved food, chilled drinks, and created fashionable frozen treats served during elegant garden parties. Simply offering guests iced beverages during a warm afternoon demonstrated remarkable wealth, because maintaining ice year round demanded considerable expense. Victorian aristocrats also possessed an extraordinary fascination with scientific innovation. As inventions transformed Britain, the richest families eagerly installed new technologies long before ordinary citizens could afford them. Mechanical elevators appeared in certain grand houses. Speaking tubes connected distant rooms so servants could be summoned without shouting. Electric bells allowed homeowners to press a button that instantly alerted specific servants waiting downstairs. Some estates experimented with early electric lighting, while neighbouring villages still relied entirely upon candles. Wealth itself allowed these families to live slightly ahead of their own era. Libraries often doubled as private museums of exploration. Shelves displayed journals written by famous explorers describing journeys through Africa, Antarctica, South America, and Asia. Wealthy gentlemen eagerly followed discoveries reported by scientists such as Charles Darwin or archaeologists uncovering ancient Egyptian tombs. Many became enthusiastic sponsors of exploration, donating vast sums to expeditions that returned with maps, fossils, plants, animals, and priceless historical artifacts. Supporting scientific discovery became another way to enhance family prestige, while contributing to Britain's growing reputation as a global centre of knowledge. Even leisure required careful planning. Croquet became fashionable upon perfectly level lawns maintained exclusively for the game. Tennis courts appeared on country estates long before the sport became widely popular. Archery offered refined entertainment for ladies dressed in elegant white gowns, while gentlemen demonstrated marksmanship during organised shooting competitions. Fishing parties occupied tranquil rivers stocked with carefully managed trout and salmon. Boating upon private lakes provided peaceful afternoon recreation accompanied by picnics prepared by servants waiting discreetly nearby. Many aristocrats developed remarkable wine and cigar rituals after dinner. Once ladies withdrew to drawing rooms, gentlemen remained seated around polished mahogany tables, discussing politics, business, colonial affairs, or literature, while servants quietly circulated with crystal decanters of aged port wine. Boxes of Havana cigars rested upon silver trays. Thick smoke drifted toward ornate ceilings, while conversations continued for hours. Younger men listened respectfully as experienced politicians, military officers, judges, bishops, and businessmen exchanged opinions. Shaping the future of Britain itself, decisions influencing industries, charitable organisations, parliamentary legislation, and overseas investments often began during these relaxed evenings among friends. Letters formed another essential part of upper-class life. Wealthy Victorians wrote constantly. Invitations, thank you notes, family news, political correspondence, business instructions, travel updates, condolences, congratulations, and romantic exchanges filled writing desks every day. Beautiful stationery embossed with family crests reflected status before recipients even opened the envelope. Secretaries assisted with business correspondence, while personal letters remained carefully handwritten using elegant penmanship admired throughout society. Some families preserved decades of correspondence, creating remarkable archives that historians still study today. Household clocks governed every aspect of aristocratic life. Grandfather clocks chimed through entrance halls, while ornate mantel clocks decorated drawing rooms, bedrooms, libraries, and dining rooms. Meals occurred at exact times. Servants followed precise schedules. Guests expected punctuality. The orderly rhythm of Victorian high society reflected a broader belief that discipline and routine represented signs of civilization itself. Even relaxation followed carefully organized patterns. Health and appearance demanded constant attention. Ladies applied subtle cosmetics despite society publicly discouraging excessive makeup. Complexions were protected from sunlight because pale skin symbolized freedom from outdoor labor. Gloves shielded hands from tanning. Gentlemen visited barbers regularly for meticulous beard trimming, while perfumers supplied refined fragrances imported from France. Dentists, though primitive by modern standards, increasingly served affluent patients eager to preserve attractive smiles. Mineral spas attracted wealthy visitors seeking fashionable health treatments, involving thermal baths, fresh mountain air, and carefully prescribed diets. Zone rarely discussed privilege involved privacy. While ordinary Victorians lived in crowded homes where entire families often shared a single room, the wealthy enjoyed personal spaces unimaginable to most people. Individual dressing rooms, private studies, morning rooms, smoking rooms, billiard rooms, music rooms, libraries, conservatories, and guest suites allowed family members to withdraw whenever desired. A gentleman reading quietly beside a fire might not encounter another family member for several hours, despite everyone living beneath the same roof. Imagine arriving at one of Britain's greatest country estates as an honoured guest during the height of the Victorian era. Long before your carriage reached the mansion, liveried gatekeepers had already been informed of your arrival. Massive wrought iron gates slowly swung open, revealing a sweeping drive lined with ancient oak trees planted generations earlier. The road curved deliberately through rolling parkland, where herds of deer grazed peacefully. Ornamental lakes reflected the afternoon sun, and carefully placed marble statues emerged from the landscape like scenes from classical mythology. Everything had been designed not merely for beauty, but to communicate one unmistakable message. The family who owned this land possessed immense wealth, impeccable taste, and a history stretching back further than most nations. As your carriage approached the entrance, a line of uniformed servants waited beneath towering stone columns. Before the wheels had completely stopped, a footman stepped forward to open the carriage door, while another carefully unloaded luggage. The butler greeted you by name without consulting any notes, welcomed you with perfect politeness, and personally escorted you into a vast entrance hall where polished marble floors reflected enormous crystal chandeliers hanging high above. Portraits of dukes, generals, admirals, bishops, and statesmen covered the walls, silently reminding every visitor that generations of this family had shaped Britain's history. Guests rarely stayed for only one evening. Invitations often lasted several days or even weeks. Upon reaching your bedroom, you discovered accommodations grand enough to rival the finest hotels of the modern world. The bed stood beneath a richly embroidered canopy with thick velvet curtains, providing warmth during cold English nights. Fresh flowers decorated tables beside the windows. A roaring fire had already been lit despite the mild weather, simply because comfort was expected. Pitchers filled with hot water stood ready for washing, while perfectly folded towels, scented soaps, embroidered dressing gowns, and polished slippers had been arranged with remarkable precision. If you mentioned enjoying a particular type of tea or preferred softer pillows during a previous visit years earlier, attentive servants often remembered without needing reminders. Every guest's daily routine became a carefully orchestrated performance. Shortly after waking, a servant quietly delivered morning tea directly to the bedroom alongside fresh newspapers from London, local correspondence, and the day's schedule. Heavy curtains were drawn back to reveal gardens sparkling with dew, while distant church bells echoed across the countryside. Looking outside, you might see gardeners already pruning rose bushes, stable boys exercising horses, gamekeepers crossing fields with hunting dogs, and maids opening windows throughout the house to allow fresh air inside. Long before breakfast, dozens of people had already worked several hours to ensure the household functioned flawlessly. Breakfast itself offered astonishing variety. Instead of choosing between one or two simple dishes, guests encountered long sideboards overflowing with possibilities: freshly baked breads, warm croissants, butter from the estate's dairy, homemade jams prepared from fruit grown in the gardens, smoked salmon, trout caught from private rivers, eggs cooked in multiple styles, sausages, bacon, grilled tomatoes, kidneys, mushrooms, porridge topped with cream, seasonal berries, imported oranges, bananas from tropical colonies, cheeses, honey, pastries, chocolate, tea, coffee, and freshly squeezed juices filled the room with irresistible aromas. No one hurried through the meal. Conversations drifted naturally while servants quietly refilled cups before anyone noticed they were nearly empty. After breakfast, guests separated according to interests. Gentlemen frequently disappeared toward stables where magnificent horses waited saddled and ready. Some spent the morning riding across thousands of acres, crossing streams, climbing wooded hills, and inspecting farms belonging to the estate. Others preferred shooting expeditions organized with military precision. Beaters walked through fields encouraging pheasants into flight, while experienced sportsmen demonstrated remarkable marksmanship. Every successful shot was carefully recorded, and the day's harvest later appeared upon the dinner table. Those less interested in hunting might enjoy fishing quiet rivers filled with trout or salmon, accompanied by professional guides employed permanently by the estate. Meanwhile, ladies enjoyed equally refined pursuits. Garden walks wound through rose gardens, ornamental bridges, and glass conservatories where tropical orchids bloomed despite England's cool climate. Artists brought sketchbooks to capture picturesque landscapes. Others practiced watercolor painting beneath shaded gazebos, while musicians rehearsed piano duets in elegant drawing rooms. Afternoon, horseback rides proceeded at gentler paces, allowing conversation while exploring woodland paths lined with bluebells during spring or golden leaves during autumn. Shopping excursions to nearby towns became important social occasions, with local merchants eagerly displaying their finest merchandise whenever distinguished visitors arrived. No remarkable feature of aristocratic life involved the astonishing number of rooms dedicated to specific activities. There might be a morning room flooded with sunlight where ladies wrote letters before lunch, a smoking room reserved exclusively for gentlemen. After dinner featured leather chairs, dark wood panelling, and cabinets filled with imported cigars. Billiard rooms echoed with quiet conversation as polished ivory balls rolled across green tables beneath shaded lamps. Music rooms contained grand pianos, harps, violins, and shelves, overflowing with sheet music. Libraries offered peaceful retreats, lined with thousands of books collected across centuries. Conservatories housed fountains surrounded by palms and exotic flowers, providing warm escapes during cold winter afternoons. Every room served a carefully defined purpose within the daily rhythm of elite society. Even something as ordinary as afternoon tea became an elegant ceremony. Precisely at the appointed hour, silver tea services appeared alongside delicate porcelain cups decorated with hand-painted flowers and gold trim. Tiered stands displayed cucumber sandwiches cut into perfect triangles, buttery scones served with clotted cream and strawberry preserves, miniature cakes, lemon tarts, Sponge fingers, fruit pastries, chocolate confections, candied fruits and biscuits so delicate they almost dissolved upon the tongue. Conversation remained light and cheerful. Politics and unpleasant topics rarely interrupted this peaceful ritual, which offered a welcome pause before evening preparations began. Preparing for dinner required astonishing effort. Ladies might spend 2 hours selecting gowns, arranging elaborate hairstyles, fastening jewels, and receiving assistance from personal maids. Gentlemen changed into perfectly tailored evening, attire complete with white waistcoats, polished shoes, silk cravats, and family decorations earned through military or public service. Meanwhile, downstairs, servants transformed dining rooms with fresh flowers, polished silver candlesticks, crystal glasses, and linen so perfectly pressed that every fold appeared identical. Dinner itself resembled a theatrical performance lasting several hours. A bell announced that the meal was ready, whereupon guests proceeded into the dining room, according to strict rules of precedence. The hostess entered accompanied by the most distinguished gentleman present, while the host escorted the highest-ranking lady. Seating arrangements reflected an intricate understanding of titles, age, political importance, and family relationships. Once everyone was seated, servants moved with remarkable coordination, serving each course simultaneously. Their footsteps remained almost silent, despite carrying heavy silver platters through crowded rooms. Conversation during dinner represented an art form requiring remarkable skill. Guests discussed literature, architecture, archaeology, scientific discoveries, travel experiences, theatre, music, and current events without dominating the conversation or appearing boastful. Clever observations earned admiration, while rude interruptions or excessive criticism damaged reputations. Children rarely attended these elaborate dinners until reaching appropriate ages, because flawless manners were considered absolutely essential. After dessert, ladies traditionally withdrew to drawing rooms while gentlemen lingered over port wine, brandy, and cigars. Discussions often became more serious, covering parliamentary debates, colonial administration, military affairs, investment opportunities, railway expansion, banking, diplomacy, or agricultural improvements. Friendships formed during these relaxed evenings sometimes influenced decisions affecting entire industries or regions of Britain. Many business partnerships, charitable initiatives, and political alliances began not in government offices but beside crackling fireplaces within aristocratic country houses. Later in the evening, everyone reunited for entertainment. Professional musicians occasionally performed chamber concerts, but more often guests entertained one another. Talented singers performed popular ballads. Skilled pianists played compositions by Chopin, Liszt, or Beethoven. Amateur actors staged humorous plays written specially for family gatherings. Charades, poetry readings, storytelling, and card games filled the hours until midnight. During Christmas or New Year celebrations, dancing continued until sunrise beneath glittering chandeliers, while orchestras played waltzes and quadrilles. Imagine that, after several days living among the wealthiest families of Victorian England, you slowly begin to notice something unusual. The greatest luxury is no longer the marble fireplaces, the crystal chandeliers, or the endless banquets. It is the complete absence of hurry. Hours seemed to move differently inside these great houses. While factory workers in Manchester measured their lives by whistles announcing the beginning and end of exhausting shifts, the upper class measured time by far gentler rhythms, the ringing of a distant church bell, the arrival of afternoon tea, the changing light across the gardens, or the quiet announcement from a butler that dinner would be served in an hour. There was rarely any reason to rush. Nearly everything had already been prepared long before it was needed. The great halls of these estates rarely stood empty. Throughout the day they echoed softly with the sounds of polished leather shoes crossing marble floors, clocks chiming every quarter hour, servants carrying trays, and distant conversations drifting from one richly decorated room to another. Sunlight poured through enormous stained glass windows, painting colourful patterns across stone floors that had been walked upon by generations of the same family. Some homes had existed for more than 300 years, surviving civil wars, changing monarchs, and political revolutions. Every room contained stories that stretched far beyond the lives of the people currently living there. Many aristocratic families possessed what they proudly called the family gallery. This was often a long corridor lined from floor to ceiling with portraits of ancestors. Kings had visited some of these people, others had fought famous battles, governed distant colonies, commanded naval fleets, advised monarchs, or negotiated treaties that shaped European history. Children grew up walking past these portraits every day, quietly absorbing the expectation that they too would someday add another painting to the wall. Family history was not merely remembered, it surrounded them constantly. The wealthiest Victorians also employed personal craftsmen, who worked almost exclusively for the family. Tailors visited regularly to measure growing children or update wardrobes according to changing fashions. Jewelers cleaned heirloom necklaces that had passed through generations. Cabinet makers repaired antique furniture using traditional techniques centuries old. Clockmakers carefully maintained enormous grandfather clocks, whose mechanisms contained hundreds of delicate moving parts. Even umbrella makers, hatters, and bootmakers often enjoyed long relationships with particular aristocratic households. Quality mattered far more than speed, and many objects were expected to last for generations rather than years. One remarkable feature of elite Victorian life was the enormous attention given to correspondence. Some ladies wrote 20 or 30 letters in a single day. Invitations had to be answered promptly. Thank you notes followed every dinner. Condolence letters were carefully composed after funerals. Congratulations marked births, engagements, marriages, promotions, and military victories. Beautiful handwriting became a symbol of education and refinement. Ink bottles, sealing wax, engraved stationery, silver letter openers, and elegant writing desks occupied important places within almost every drawing room. Entire mornings could disappear quietly while someone sat beside a window writing graceful sentences to relatives scattered across Britain and the Empire. The arrival of guests transformed a peaceful household into a lively community. During the famous London season or throughout country house weekends, bedrooms filled quickly with cousins, politicians, military officers, artists, musicians, bishops, explorers, and foreign diplomats. Breakfast conversations became wonderfully unpredictable. One guest might describe climbing alpine mountains. Another recounted adventures hunting tigers in India. A retired admiral shared stories of storms in the Atlantic. An archaeologist explained newly discovered Egyptian temples. Children sat listening with wide eyes as extraordinary tales unfolded over coffee and toast. The world seemed much larger within these houses, because so many visitors had seen distant places that ordinary Victorians could scarcely imagine. Many great estates maintained workshops where skilled craftsmen repaired almost everything needed by the household. Blacksmiths forged horseshoes, gates, tools, and decorative ironwork. Carpenters built furniture and repaired doors, staircases, and windows. Wheelwrights maintained carriage wheels. Saddlers produced riding equipment from fine leather seamstresses' altered gowns, while upholsterers restored chairs covered in silk or velvet. A wealthy estate resembled a small self-sufficient village capable of producing or repairing nearly anything without relying heavily upon nearby towns. The Victorian fascination with nature influenced every aspect of upper-class life. Collections of pressed flowers filled beautifully illustrated albums. Greenhouses displayed orchids blooming beside giant ferns collected from tropical forests. Butterfly collections occupied glass cases arranged with scientific precision. Birdsong echoed through carefully managed woodlands, where gamekeepers protected rare species, while encouraging others for seasonal hunting. Some aristocrats became respected amateur botanists or ornithologists, publishing detailed observations admired even by professional scientists. Wealth provided both the time and resources necessary to pursue knowledge simply for pleasure. Libraries often became peaceful sanctuaries during rainy afternoons. Thick carpets absorbed every footstep while fires crackled gently beneath carved stone fireplaces. Shelves climbed almost to the ceiling, requiring rolling ladders to reach the highest books. The smell of polished wood, leather bindings, paper, and burning oak created an atmosphere unlike anywhere else in the house. Some gentlemen spent entire afternoons reading history, philosophy, or travel journals while rain tapped softly against tall windows. Others quietly dozed in oversized leather chairs after lunch, undisturbed except by the occasional turning of a page. Even weather itself seemed different within these great houses. Violent storms that worried farmers often became pleasant spectacles for wealthy families. Guests gathered beside enormous windows to watch rain sweep across gardens, while servants added fresh logs to roaring fireplaces. Thunder echoed through distant hills as tea arrived, accompanied by warm cakes and fresh cream. Snow transformed estates into peaceful landscapes, where children enjoyed sledding, while adults admired the view from comfortably heated drawing rooms. Seasons became something to appreciate, rather than endure, because wealth protected families from many of nature's hardships. Art occupied an important place in everyday life. Wealthy collectors filled walls with landscapes, portraits, religious scenes, and historical paintings purchased from Britain's finest artists. Marble sculptures decorated entrance halls. Bronze statues overlooked gardens. Delicate porcelain figures stood inside glass cabinets. Even ceilings frequently displayed painted scenes inspired by Greek mythology or Renaissance masterpieces. Guests strolling through the house encountered beauty at every turn, often without realizing how extraordinary such surroundings truly were. Many aristocrats also supported young artists, musicians, and writers whose talents might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Promising painters received commissions to produce family portraits. Composers performed new works before private audiences. Poets read unpublished verses after dinner. Authors discussed their latest novels over afternoon tea. Patronage became both a privilege and a responsibility. Supporting culture enhanced personal reputation while enriching British society as a whole. Perhaps surprisingly, many wealthy Victorians loved simple outdoor pleasures, despite living amid extraordinary luxury. They enjoyed long walks through ancient woodlands, watching sunsets across quiet lakes, picnics beneath enormous oak trees, rowing boats across calm rivers, gathering mushrooms in autumn forests, or simply sitting beneath garden pavilions, listening to birdsong. These peaceful moments provided welcome contrast to the formality of London's crowded social season. Country life represented tranquility, fresh air, and tradition, qualities deeply admired by the upper class. The kitchens revealed another fascinating contrast. While family members dined elegantly upstairs, kitchens bustled with remarkable energy below. Copper pots hung from ceilings, massive roasting spits slowly turned before open fires, pastry chefs decorated cakes with astonishing precision, and cooks supervised dozens of assistants preparing meals that would disappear within hours. Yet despite producing magnificent feasts every day, many kitchen workers rarely tasted the luxurious dishes they created. Upstairs and downstairs existed almost like separate worlds connected only by staircases and servant corridors, hidden from guests. Nighttime brought its own quiet magic. After the final guest retired, silence gradually settled across the mansion. Candles flickered softly along endless hallways. Moonlight reflected upon polished floors and silver picture frames. Somewhere outside, an owl called from ancient trees planted centuries before. Garden fountains continued flowing gently beneath the stars, while distant horses shifted quietly within warm stables. Inside, clocks continued marking the passing hours exactly as they had for generations. The house itself seemed almost alive, breathing slowly through another peaceful Victorian night. Imagine that an entire year has now passed while living among the richest families of Victorian England. The changing seasons reveal that luxury was never a single experience, but a constantly shifting rhythm, where every month brought fresh pleasures and carefully observed traditions. The arrival of January covered the countryside with frost that sparkled like scattered diamonds across the lawns. Smoke curled gently from dozens of chimneys, while the mansion remained warm from hundreds of fireplaces burning day and night. Thick Persian carpets softened every footstep. Velvet curtains kept the cold outside, and polished brass fire screens reflected the dancing flames. Winter, which could be a season of hardship for ordinary people, became one of comfort and quiet elegance for the wealthy. Snow transformed the estate into what seemed almost like a fairy tale. Children hurried outside, bundled in expensive wool coats, fur-lined boots, and knitted scarves made by skilled craftsmen. They built snowmen beside ancient fountains, threw snowballs across the gardens, and raced sleds down gentle hills that gardeners carefully selected for safety. Nearby, servants waited with warm blankets and steaming mugs of hot chocolate, ready the moment little hands became cold. Once everyone returned indoors, boots disappeared before the entrance hall became muddy. Damp coats were dried beside roaring fires, and warm towels appeared as though by magic. Every inconvenience disappeared almost before anyone noticed it. During long winter evenings, the mansion became especially alive. Candles flickered inside crystal chandeliers, while enormous fireplaces illuminated richly decorated drawing rooms with soft golden light. Families gathered together, not because they lacked entertainment, but because conversation itself remained one of the greatest pleasures. Grandparents described their youth during the reign of earlier monarchs. Elderly uncles recalled military adventures in distant lands. Aunts shared amusing stories about famous people they had met decades earlier. Younger family members listened attentively, absorbing memories that gradually became part of the family's own living history. The wealthy also adored puzzles, riddles, and intellectual games. Chessboards carved from ebony and ivory occupied polished tables. Guests challenged one another to lengthy matches that sometimes lasted several evenings. Others preferred complicated card games requiring remarkable memory and strategy. Charades remained immensely popular, encouraging entire families to act out famous novels, historical events, or mythical stories while everyone else laughed and guessed. These entertainments required no electricity, no screens, and no machines beyond imagination itself. By February, plans for spring were already underway. Gardeners studied detailed maps of flower beds, deciding exactly where thousands of tulips, daffodils, hyacinths, and crocuses would bloom. Greenhouses became filled with seedlings carefully nurtured under glass, while snow still covered the ground outside. Wealthy landowners often competed quietly over whose gardens would appear most spectacular once warmer weather arrived. Rare flowers imported from Europe or Asia became treasured possessions, and discovering a newly cultivated variety brought almost as much satisfaction as acquiring a valuable painting spring, transformed the estate almost overnight. Birds returned to ancient trees, filling the mornings with cheerful songs that drifted through open bedroom windows. Streams flowed more quickly after winter rains, and carpets of bluebells covered woodland floors beneath towering beech and oak trees. Gentlemen resumed horseback rides across fields glowing with fresh green grass, while ladies wandered through blossoming orchards carrying parasols that shielded delicate complexions from too much sunlight. The air itself seemed sweeter, carrying the scent of flowering lilacs, roses, and freshly cut grass. Every corner of the estate reflected astonishing attention to detail. Gravel paths were raked into perfect patterns each morning. Hedges were trimmed with incredible precision until they resembled green walls sculpted by artists. Garden benches were scrubbed clean before guests arrived. Even the smallest weeds disappeared, almost immediately because teams of gardeners constantly patrolled the grounds. Visitors often remarked that everything looked effortlessly beautiful, rarely realizing how much invisible labor maintained such perfection. The arrival of guests remained one of the household's greatest pleasures. Carriages rolled slowly beneath towering trees while servants hurried to receive luggage. Bedrooms were prepared with fresh flowers chosen specifically, according to each guest's preferences whenever possible. Favorite books might quietly appear upon bedside tables. If someone enjoyed morning walks, maps of woodland paths were thoughtfully placed inside the room. Hospitality extended far beyond polite conversation. Every detail subtly communicated that guests were valued and expected to feel completely at home. The Victorian upper class possessed a remarkable appreciation for craftsmanship. Rather than replacing damaged possessions, they preferred repairing and preserving them. Chairs inherited from great-grandparents were carefully restored by skilled cabinet makers. Torn tapestries received painstaking repairs, almost invisible to the eye. Silver developed over centuries was polished until it gleamed once more. Even cracked porcelain sometimes underwent delicate restoration, because sentimental value often outweighed practical considerations. Family heirlooms connected living generations with ancestors long gone, making preservation an important responsibility. Summer brought another transformation. Lawns became stages for elegant garden parties attended by dozens or even hundreds of guests dressed in light, coloured clothing that reflected the warm sunshine. Long tables covered with white linen stood beneath enormous trees, while servants carried silver trays laden with strawberries, cream, sandwiches, pastries, lemonade, champagne, and delicate cakes decorated with edible flowers. Gentle music floated across the gardens as string quartets performed beneath striped tents, erected specially for the occasion. Croquet matches unfolded on perfectly level lawns, while children laughed nearby chasing butterflies through blooming flower beds. Photography gradually became an important feature of these summer gatherings. Families assembled carefully upon broad stone steps leading to the mansion, while photographers adjusted cumbersome cameras hidden beneath black cloths. Everyone remained remarkably still during long exposure times, resulting in the serious expressions now familiar in surviving Victorian photographs. Yet once the camera work concluded, smiles quickly returned as conversations resumed, and children escaped toward the gardens once more. The wealthy also enjoyed remarkable privacy despite entertaining frequently. Many estates contained secluded gardens, hidden behind high hedges or ancient walls, where only close family members ventured. Small pavilions overlooked quiet lakes, offering peaceful retreats for reading, writing, or simply enjoying the gentle sounds of birds and flowing water. Some families maintained hidden rose gardens, known only to relatives, creating intimate spaces far removed from the formal grandeur visible to visitors. Late summer often brought the beginning of harvest celebrations across the estate. Although wealthy landowners rarely participated directly in physical labour, they observed the harvest with genuine interest because successful crops benefited everyone living upon the land. Village festivals featured music, dancing competitions, and generous feasts, partly funded by the estate. Landowners distributed prizes for outstanding farming, gardening, baking, and craftsmanship, reinforcing close relationships between the great house and the surrounding community. Autumn perhaps displayed the countryside at its most beautiful. Ancient forests glowed with brilliant shades of amber, copper, crimson, and gold. Gentle breezes carried falling leaves across winding pathways, while mist drifted lazily above quiet lakes each morning. Guests arrived for the famous shooting season, filling the mansion with cheerful conversation and anticipation. Breakfasts became heartier, featuring warming dishes before long days outdoors. Evenings ended with magnificent dinners celebrating the day's adventures, followed by stories shared beside enormous fireplaces while rain softly tapped against leaded windows. Books accumulated steadily throughout the year. New shelves occasionally became necessary because collections continued expanding with every passing decade. Wealthy Victorians believed deeply in lifelong learning, and libraries reflected that belief. Children explored illustrated adventure stories, while adults debated philosophy, archaeology, natural history, economics, and poetry. Reading was never regarded as an obligation, but as one of civilization's greatest pleasures. Music remained woven into almost every celebration. Piano melodies drifted through open windows during sunny afternoons. Violins accompanied formal dances, Choirs performed during religious festivals. Guests often sang together after dinner, filling drawing rooms with harmonies that echoed softly through the corridors. Families sometimes commissioned original compositions celebrating weddings, anniversaries, or important birthdays, ensuring that music itself became part of family history. As another year quietly drew to its close, preparations for Christmas began once again. Great halls filled with evergreen branches gathered from estate forests. Massive trees were decorated with candles, ribbons, gilded walnuts, handmade ornaments, glass baubles, and sweets wrapped in shining paper. Imagine lingering a little longer within one of these magnificent Victorian estates, staying long enough that the dazzling luxury begins to feel almost ordinary. After several weeks, you notice that what once seemed extraordinary has quietly become part of everyday life. No one comments on the marble staircase because it has always been there. No one admires the priceless paintings hanging in the corridor because generations of the family have walked past them every day since childhood. Even the breathtaking view from the library window, stretching across thousands of acres of green countryside, becomes something taken for granted. This may have been the greatest privilege of all. Not merely possessing incredible wealth, but eventually forgetting how unusual that wealth truly was. As dawn slowly brightened the English countryside, the estate awoke in carefully timed stages. The first sounds came not from the family, but from the workers whose efforts kept the great house alive. Somewhere in the distance, dairy maids began milking cows, while stable hands swept fresh straw into horse stalls. Gardeners rolled heavy watering carts toward flower beds before the morning sun grew too warm. Bakers removed fresh loaves from enormous brick ovens, filling underground kitchens with the comforting aroma of warm bread. Laundry maids carried baskets of spotless linen through hidden corridors, while chimney sweeps checked fireplaces after the previous night's fires had burned low. By the time the family finally opened their eyes, an entire village of people had already completed several hours of work. The estate itself operated almost like a small kingdom. There were workshops where blacksmiths repaired gates and horseshoes, dairies producing butter and cheese, orchards supplying fruit, vegetable gardens stretching across acres, forests managed for timber, rivers stocked with fish, farms producing grain, and cottages housing workers whose families had often served the estate for generations. Some villages existed almost entirely because of one aristocratic family. The landowner might employ hundreds of people directly, making decisions that influenced nearly every aspect of local life. Weddings, funerals, festivals, harvest celebrations, and church services often revolved around the great house standing proudly above the surrounding countryside. Many wealthy Victorians developed a fascination with clocks and timepieces. Nearly every important room contained an elegant clock, each carefully maintained and wound according to strict schedules. Some chimed softly every 15 minutes, while others played gentle melodies on the hour. Visitors often remarked that walking through a great house felt like moving through a symphony of ticking mechanisms. These clocks represented more than decoration. They symbolized order, discipline, and stability, qualities deeply admired during the Victorian age. Fresh flowers appeared everywhere. It was almost impossible to enter a room without finding carefully arranged bouquets gathered from the estate gardens only hours earlier. Roses filled crystal vases in drawing rooms, lilies decorated entrance halls, lavender scented bedrooms, ferns softened corners of libraries. while orchids occupied pride of place inside conservatories. Skilled gardeners carefully selected flowers whose colours complemented wallpaper, carpets, and furniture. As one arrangement faded, another quietly replaced it before anyone noticed. Beauty itself became part of the household routine. The wealthy also possessed remarkable wardrobes that reflected the changing seasons. Winter brought heavy wool coats lined with fur, velvet evening gowns, cashmere shawls, leather gloves, and polished riding boots. Spring introduced lighter silks, floral patterns, lace collars, and pastel colours inspired by blooming gardens. Summer clothing emphasized breathable linen and cotton fabrics, suitable for garden parties and outdoor gatherings. Autumn welcomed rich shades of burgundy, emerald, and deep gold that echoed the changing leaves surrounding the estate. Fashion was not simply about appearance, but about harmony with the rhythm of the year itself. Breakfast conversations often revealed how different aristocratic concerns could be from those of ordinary people. Rather than discussing wages or household expenses, family members debated whether the roses required relocating, whether another greenhouse should be constructed, which composer would perform during next month's musical evening, or whether it might be time to acquire another painting from a respected London gallery. Financial worries certainly existed, but they usually involved maintaining great fortunes rather than earning enough to survive. Many of the richest families employed full-time librarians whose responsibility extended beyond organizing books. They catalogued manuscripts, repaired damaged bindings, acquired newly published works, and sometimes translated foreign texts requested by curious family members. Large libraries continued growing with every generation, eventually containing tens of thousands of volumes covering history, science, exploration, architecture, religion, philosophy, medicine, travel, poetry, and literature. Knowledge became another inheritance passed carefully from parents to children. Rainy afternoons possessed their own quiet elegance. Heavy clouds gathered over rolling hills, while raindrops tapped gently against tall windows. Instead of feeling trapped indoors, families embraced these peaceful hours. Fires burned warmly in every occupied room. Someone played gentle piano music, drifting softly through open doors. Others gathered around card tables, embroidered elaborate patterns, solved chess problems, read novels aloud, or simply watched the rain transform gardens into shimmering landscapes. The outside world seemed wonderfully distant, safely separated by thick stone walls and glowing fireplaces. The estate kitchens never truly rested. Even after enormous dinners concluded, preparations immediately began for the following day. Bones simmered into rich broths overnight. Bread dough rose slowly beneath warm cloths. Fruit preserved during summer became jams and marmalades. For winter breakfasts, skilled pastry chefs experimented with new desserts inspired by French cuisine. Recipe books grew thicker each year as cooks carefully recorded successful creations alongside notes describing subtle improvements. Many aristocratic households became famous for particular dishes that guests hoped to enjoy during every visit. Servants developed astonishing memories. A butler might remember that one guest preferred tea without sugar, despite not visiting for several years. A lady's maid recalled exactly how her employer liked particular gowns arranged before important events. Gardeners knew which flowers each family member admired most. Cooks remembered favourite puddings requested by elderly relatives. This attention to detail created the illusion that the house itself anticipated every desire before anyone spoke aloud. The wealthy also maintained fascinating relationships with the changing landscape around them. Autumn transformed woodlands into brilliant shades of amber and crimson, encouraging long walks collecting colourful leaves and chestnuts. Winter frosts coated gardens with sparkling crystals, while frozen lakes occasionally welcomed carefully supervised skating parties. Spring brought carpets of bluebells beneath ancient forests, followed by blossoms filling orchards with delicate fragrance. Summer invited picnics beside rivers, shaded by towering oaks whose branches had spread slowly across centuries. Every season offered new pleasures because the estate had been designed to remain beautiful throughout the entire year. Artisans frequently visited the house carrying remarkable creations. Silversmiths presented newly completed serving dishes, engraved with intricate family crests. Glassmakers delivered crystal chandeliers, sparkling with hundreds of hand-cut prisms. Cabinet makers unveiled desks crafted from rare woods imported across oceans. Clockmakers demonstrated exquisitely engineered timepieces, featuring tiny moving figures that danced whenever the hour struck. Purchasing beautiful objects became less about necessity than about preserving craftsmanship itself. Many wealthy Victorians loved observing the night sky. Without modern city lights flooding the countryside, stars appeared astonishingly bright above great estates. Some families constructed private observatories equipped with powerful telescopes that revealed the rings of Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, and distant nebulae. Guests wrapped themselves in warm blankets, while astronomically minded hosts pointed toward constellations and explained recent discoveries, transforming humanity's understanding of the universe. Even among unimaginable luxury, moments of quiet wonder remained deeply treasured. As years passed, children gradually became adults beneath the watchful gaze of countless ancestors staring from portrait galleries. Weddings filled chapels with flowers and music. Babies were christened before the same altar used by generations of relatives. Elderly family members passed away peacefully within bedrooms overlooking gardens they had admired throughout long lives. Seasons changed, servants came and went, governments rose and fell, inventions transformed the outside world, yet the estate itself seemed almost untouched by time. It represented continuity in an age of rapid change. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this extraordinary lifestyle was how completely it insulated the wealthy from ordinary hardship. If winter proved unusually harsh, the fireplaces simply burned longer. If harvests failed elsewhere, stocked storerooms ensured abundant food remained available. If fashion changed, new wardrobes appeared. If travel beckoned, carriages stood ready. Imagine following the family into one of the quieter months of the Victorian year, when there were no grand balls to attend in London, and no royal ceremonies demanding formal appearances. Even during these supposedly peaceful weeks, life for the filthy rich remained astonishingly busy, though rarely in ways that resembled work. their calendars filled with visits from neighbouring aristocrats, inspections of gardens, musical evenings, riding excursions, charitable meetings, church services, family celebrations, and countless leisurely pursuits that occupied the hours without ever feeling hurried. Every day possessed its own comfortable rhythm, and every season offered pleasures carefully anticipated months in advance. A remarkable feature of wealthy Victorian life was how much attention they devoted to preserving family traditions. Every household possessed customs that had been repeated for decades, sometimes centuries. The same chair at the dining table belonged to the head of the family. The same silver tea service appeared every Sunday afternoon. Certain portraits were uncovered only during important celebrations. Particular wines were reserved exclusively for Christmas or weddings. Family recipe books passed from one generation to the next, containing instructions written in elegant handwriting by long deceased grandmothers whose influence still lingered in every festive meal. These traditions gave the household a comforting sense of continuity, as though each generation merely borrowed the estate before passing it carefully to the next. Many great houses contained rooms that visitors seldom entered. Locked doors occasionally concealed private family chapels, where generations had worshipped together. Some rooms displayed military uniforms worn during famous battles, while others stored ancient weapons, faded battle flags, and handwritten letters from kings or queens thanking ancestors for loyal service. Dust-covered trunks hidden in attics held wedding dresses, childhood toys, travel journals, and forgotten treasures collected during journeys across Europe. Elderly relatives delighted in opening these trunks for curious grandchildren, revealing miniature worlds preserved almost untouched by time. The wealthy also enjoyed an extraordinary relationship with food that extended far beyond daily meals. Fruit walls warmed by the sun allowed peaches, apricots, and nectarines to ripen, despite England's cool climate. Vinehouses produced grapes worthy of continental vineyards. Kitchen gardens stretched across acres, supplying fresh vegetables throughout the year. Orchards produced apples, pears, cherries, and plums in astonishing abundance. Dairy herds provided rich cream butter and cheeses crafted using recipes perfected over generations. Even honey came from beehives carefully maintained within the estate. Much of what appeared upon aristocratic dining tables had travelled only a few hundred yards from garden to kitchen. Fishing lakes were often stocked with carp, trout, and pike exclusively for family recreation. Swans glided gracefully across still water, while ornamental bridges connected tiny islands planted with weeping willows and flowering shrubs. Guests frequently spent peaceful afternoons rowing quietly across these lakes, pausing only to admire reflections of the mansion shimmering upon the surface. Nearby boathouses stored polished wooden boats, painted in family colours, maintained as carefully as the family's finest carriages. Many aristocrats developed surprisingly practical interests despite lives of enormous comfort. Some became skilled architects, designing new wings for ancient houses or restoring medieval castles that had fallen into ruin. Others experimented with agricultural improvements, introducing new farming methods long before they became common elsewhere. Wealth allowed these projects to continue for years without concern for immediate profit. Satisfaction often came simply from improving the estate or leaving something beautiful for future generations. The estate church occupied a central place in community life. On Sunday mornings, villagers gathered alongside servants and members of the family, though everyone understood exactly where they should sit. The aristocratic family occupied prominent pews near the front, while tenants filled the remaining benches. After the service, the landowner frequently greeted villagers individually, asking after illnesses, harvests, births, or family concerns. These conversations reinforced a paternal relationship in which wealthy landowners saw themselves as guardians responsible for the welfare of those living upon their estates. Christmas preparations often began weeks before December arrived. Servants decorated hallways with holly, ivy, and evergreen branches gathered from nearby woods. Massive Yule logs waited beside fireplaces, kitchens filled with the rich aromas of spices, dried fruits, roasted nuts, and cakes soaked in brandy. Children rehearsed Christmas carols, while musicians prepared festive performances. Every servant received gifts from the family, often including warm clothing, food hampers, small bonuses, and personal presents chosen with surprising care. Although social divisions remained immense, many aristocratic households genuinely viewed long-serving staff as extended members of the estate community. One particularly charming Victorian custom involved evening storytelling. Before widespread radio or cinema, families gathered beside roaring fires while older relatives recounted adventures from decades earlier. Stories of dangerous sea voyages, encounters with royalty, unexpected romances, military campaigns, ghostly legends, daring fox hunts, or humorous family mishaps entertained listeners for hours. Young children often begged grandparents to repeat favorite tales, even though they already knew every twist by heart. These evenings created memories that endured far longer than expensive possessions. Books arrived constantly from London's publishers. New novels by famous authors quickly found places upon drawing room tables where family members eagerly discussed the latest chapters. Reading aloud became fashionable entertainment, especially during long winter evenings. One person read while everyone else embroidered, polished silver, played cards, or simply relaxed beside the fire. Charles Dickens, Anthony Trollope, the Brontë sisters, George Eliot, and countless other Victorian writers became familiar voices within aristocratic homes. Guests frequently commented upon the remarkable quietness of country estates. Unlike London's constant traffic, the countryside offered gentle sounds that rarely disturbed conversation. Birds sang from ancient trees. Church bells drifted softly across open fields. Horses' hooves echoed faintly along distant lanes. Wind rustled through forests planted centuries earlier. Streams flowed quietly beneath stone bridges covered in moss. This peaceful atmosphere became one of the greatest luxuries available to the wealthy, especially after spending months amidst the noise and excitement of the capital. Portrait painting remained deeply important throughout Victorian society. Every major life event seemed to inspire another commission. Engagements, marriages, military promotions, inheritances, and significant birthdays all deserved permanent artistic remembrance. Families patiently posed for countless hours while celebrated artists captured every detail of embroidered clothing, polished furniture, family pets, and magnificent interiors. These portraits eventually formed visual histories stretching across generations, allowing descendants to gaze directly into the faces of ancestors they had never met. The wealthy also enjoyed remarkable access to education throughout their lives. distinguished historians visited private libraries to lecture about ancient civilizations. Famous scientists demonstrated new discoveries before intimate audiences. Explorers returning from Africa or the Arctic shared first-hand accounts unavailable anywhere else. Rather than attending public events, aristocratic families often invited the world's leading thinkers directly into their homes for evenings of conversation. Learning became not merely an obligation, but one of life's greatest pleasures. As children grew older, they gradually assumed greater responsibilities within the estate. Young men accompanied fathers while inspecting farms, reviewing accounts, meeting tenants, or discussing improvements with estate managers. Young women learned how to organize large households, supervise servants, arrange charitable events, host distinguished guests, and preserve family traditions. Education never truly ended because managing such enormous households required remarkable organizational skill despite the absence of physical labor. One often overlooked luxury involved clothing storage. Dressing rooms contained rows of wardrobes crafted from polished mahogany, cedar, or walnut. Shelves overflowed with carefully folded linen. Hat boxes stacked neatly against walls. Gloves occupied specially designed drawers lined with silk. Jewelry rested inside velvet-covered compartments. Boots stood in perfect rows after being polished daily. Everything possessed its proper place, maintained by servants who understood every owner's preferences without needing instructions. Summer evenings often ended outdoors rather than inside the mansion. Families wandered through scented gardens as daylight lingered across the English countryside. The setting sun painted lakes with shades of gold and crimson, while swallows darted gracefully overhead. Gentle conversations continued beneath ancient trees planted by ancestors long forgotten. Sometimes musicians performed from garden pavilions, while guests listened from comfortable chairs placed upon perfectly trimmed lawns. Imagine that instead of merely visiting one of these magnificent estates, you had lived there long enough to witness how wealth shaped even the smallest, most ordinary moments. Luxury in Victorian England was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it revealed itself in quiet details, so subtle that the family hardly noticed them anymore. Every morning, fresh newspapers from London arrived before breakfast, carried overnight by railway, so that yesterday's political debates, foreign news and society gossip could be discussed while the tea was still hot. Letters from Paris, Rome, Vienna, or Cairo appeared almost as effortlessly, delivered by an empire whose vast network connected distant continents to the drawing rooms of England's elite. The household itself never truly slept. Even after midnight, life continued below stairs. Bakers prepared tomorrow's bread while the head cook reviewed menus for the coming week. Stable lanterns glowed softly as grooms checked valuable horses one final time before dawn. Gardeners studied weather reports, deciding whether delicate flowers needed protection from unexpected frost. Housemaids quietly folded freshly ironed linen that still carried the faint scent of lavender. Somewhere in the basement, engineers tended boilers that heated water throughout the enormous house. Although the family upstairs rested peacefully, dozens of people remained awake, ensuring that the illusion of effortless comfort would greet them once again at sunrise. The wealthy also possessed something almost impossible to purchase today: complete silence whenever they desired it. A gentleman seeking solitude simply walked into a private library overlooking miles of woodland. A lady wishing to read quietly might retreat to a sunlit morning room where only birdsong drifted through open windows. No traffic disturbed the countryside. No machinery echoed across the hills. The loudest sounds often came from distant church bells, rustling leaves, or horses grazing peacefully beyond the gardens. This deep silence became one of the rarest luxuries of all. Many great estates contained hidden passages known only to servants. Narrow staircases wound invisibly behind walls, allowing meals, luggage, coal, and laundry to move throughout the house without interrupting elegant conversations upstairs. Guests rarely noticed how dinner appeared precisely on time, or how empty plates disappeared so quickly. Entire networks of corridors operated behind the scenes like invisible arteries, keeping the mansion alive. Architecture itself had been designed to preserve the graceful illusion that comfort simply happened naturally. The family silver represented another quiet symbol of astonishing wealth. Cupboards hidden behind locked doors contained hundreds upon hundreds of matching pieces. Soup ladles, carving knives, serving spoons, butter dishes, gravy boats, candlesticks, trays, wine coolers, tea services, sugar bowls, cream jugs, fruit baskets, cake stands, and elaborate centerpieces all carried the same engraved family crest. During large celebrations, dining tables glittered beneath candlelight, as though covered in liquid silver. After every meal, each individual piece was carefully washed, dried, polished, counted, and locked away again by trusted servants whose entire careers depended upon maintaining these priceless collections. The richest Victorians often possessed remarkable patience. Because wealth removed urgency, projects unfolded slowly over many years. A new wing added to the house might require a decade to complete. A landscape garden could take 20 years before trees reached the desired height. Oak saplings were planted with future generations in mind rather than immediate beauty. Fathers knew they might never sit beneath the shade of trees they planted. Yet they did so anyway, believing their grandchildren would someday enjoy them. This long view of time influenced everything from architecture to gardening, creating estates that seemed to improve with every passing generation. Children enjoyed freedoms rarely imagined by city dwellers. Entire forests became their playgrounds. They built imaginary forts beside streams, climbed ancient trees, searched for bird nests beneath careful supervision, collected acorns, wildflowers, and unusual stones, or spent afternoons exploring forgotten corners of the estate where old ruins slowly disappeared beneath ivy. Parents worried far less about traffic or crowded streets, because the surrounding land belonged entirely to the family. Adventure began only a short walk from the front door. Even ordinary household objects reflected remarkable craftsmanship. Door handles were carved from polished brass bearing intricate floral designs. Staircase banisters had been shaped by hand decades earlier. Ceiling mouldings displayed astonishing detail, visible only to those who looked carefully. Window glass, slightly uneven because it had been handmade, scattered sunlight into gentle ripples across wooden floors. Every object carried evidence of skilled human hands rather than factory assembly lines. Living among such craftsmanship quietly influenced people's appreciation for beauty. Rain itself became an experience rather than an inconvenience. During heavy storms, guests gathered beneath covered terraces, watching drops dance across ornamental lakes. Rainwater flowed from carved stone gargoyles, decorating ancient roofs before splashing into carefully designed drainage channels hidden beneath gardens. The scent of wet earth drifted through open windows while thunder rolled gently across distant hills. Inside, servants added another log to the fire. Tea arrived accompanied by warm scones, and conversations continued comfortably while nature displayed its quiet power outside. Many aristocratic households developed traditions surrounding birthdays that differed little from royal celebrations. Dining rooms filled with flowers gathered before sunrise. Favorite dishes appeared regardless of season because wealth allowed expensive ingredients to be imported from abroad. Musicians performed requested compositions while family members presented carefully chosen gifts, many of which had been commissioned months earlier from respected craftsmen. Children eagerly anticipated not merely presents, but the joyful gathering of relatives travelling from distant estates to celebrate together. One remarkable aspect of immense wealth was the ability to preserve beauty that would otherwise disappear. Ancient castles crumbling into ruin were restored stone by stone. Historic churches received generous donations preventing their collapse. Priceless paintings damaged by age were entrusted to expert restorers. Rare books suffering from fragile bindings underwent painstaking repairs. Wealthy collectors often believed themselves temporary guardians rather than owners, preserving cultural treasures for generations yet unborn. Conversation within these houses frequently drifted toward future plans extending decades ahead. Which child might someday inherit the estate? Should another woodland be planted? Would the old bridge require rebuilding before the next generation took responsibility? Families discussed not merely next month or next year, but the next 50 years. Their wealth encouraged thinking on an almost historical scale. Even illness rarely interrupted the smooth rhythm of aristocratic life for long. Physicians arrived directly at the house carrying leather cases filled with medical instruments. Nurses remained overnight if necessary. Quiet rooms overlooking gardens provided peaceful recovery. Favorite meals appeared as appetite returned. Family members took turns reading novels aloud beside the bed while flowers from the greenhouse brightened the room. Every possible comfort surrounded those recovering from illness, reflecting both affection and immense financial resources. The estate workshops became places of constant quiet industry. Wheelwrights repaired carriage wheels before tiny cracks became dangerous. Saddlers stitched worn leather until it looked new again. Garden tools were sharpened daily. Furniture received fresh polish each season. Nothing valuable was neglected because maintaining possessions formed part of preserving family heritage. A chair built for a great-grandfather might still serve comfortably more than a century later. As evening settled once again, oil lamps and gaslights gradually illuminated the mansion one room at a time. Their warm glow reflected from polished mirrors, crystal glass, marble fireplaces, and gleaming wooden floors outside. Darkness slowly enveloped the countryside, while stars appeared above ancient trees untouched by city smoke. Somewhere far across the fields, an owl called into the night. Within the drawing room, someone quietly turned another page of a well-loved novel, while another guest softly played a Chopin nocturne upon the grand piano. No one hurried to end the evening because tomorrow promised another day equally peaceful. Perhaps the greatest privilege enjoyed by the wealthiest Victorians. was the feeling that life itself possessed permanence. The house had stood for centuries before they were born, and would likely stand for centuries after they were gone. Oaks planted by distant ancestors still shaded garden paths. Portraits painted long ago still watched silently from panelled walls. Family silver continued appearing upon the same dining table where countless generations had gathered before. Every tradition linked the present to the past, creating the comforting illusion that nothing truly important would ever change. History, of course, would eventually prove otherwise. The 20th century would bring world wars, economic upheaval, changing social attitudes, heavy taxation, declining fortunes, and the gradual disappearance of many of these magnificent lifestyles. Countless great houses would be sold, demolished, or transformed into museums. Imagine remaining at the estate for many more months, long enough to witness moments that no visitor would normally see. The grandeur of Victorian wealth was not confined to formal dinners or glittering ballroom evenings. It revealed itself most clearly during the quiet hours when nothing special was happening at all. A Tuesday morning in October could be just as luxurious as Christmas Day. The family might awaken to a gentle mist drifting across the lawns, with sunlight slowly breaking through ancient oak trees planted by ancestors centuries earlier. Breakfast was unhurried. Conversations wandered from poetry to politics, and no one seemed to glance anxiously at the clock. Time belonged to them, and that alone separated their lives from those of millions of ordinary Victorians. The master of the house often began his day with what was known as the estate papers. These were thick leather folders containing reports prepared by secretaries and estate managers. They described harvest yields, repairs to tenant cottages, accounts from farms, letters from lawyers, invitations from Parliament, charitable requests, and updates from overseas investments. Yet even this responsibility unfolded comfortably inside a beautifully furnished study. Large windows overlooked peaceful gardens, a silver coffee service stood nearby, and polished bookshelves surrounded the room with thousands of carefully collected volumes. Decisions affecting hundreds of workers might be made while sitting in an armchair upholstered in soft leather beside a crackling fire. Meanwhile, the lady of the house followed a different rhythm. She might spend the morning arranging flowers gathered only moments earlier from the gardens, reviewing household accounts with the housekeeper, writing invitations for an upcoming dinner party, or visiting the estate school, where village children received education, funded by the family. Victorian society expected wealthy women to oversee domestic life with quiet efficiency. Running such an enormous household demanded remarkable organisation, although much of the physical work fell upon servants. Every guest room, every linen cupboard, every pantry, every flower arrangement, and every formal dinner reflected her attention to detail. Children often enjoyed lessons in rooms flooded with natural light. Large globes stood in corners beside maps showing Britain's vast empire, stretching across continents. Shelves overflowed with books on geography, astronomy, history, natural science, and classical literature. Lessons sometimes paused unexpectedly because a rare bird had landed outside the window, or because gardeners had discovered an unusual flower blooming in the grounds. Education became wonderfully connected to the world surrounding them, rather than confined entirely to textbooks. The wealthy possessed an extraordinary relationship with craftsmanship. If a chair required repair, it was entrusted to an expert cabinet maker rather than replaced. If a clock stopped working after 50 years, A master clockmaker carefully dismantled its intricate mechanism piece by piece before restoring it to perfect condition. Fine furniture often survived several generations because each family believed it had a responsibility to preserve beautiful objects rather than consume them quickly. Many possessions carried stories alongside practical value. A writing desk might have belonged to a great-grandfather who served under Queen Victoria herself. A porcelain tea set may have been purchased during a journey through Europe. Decades earlier, every object quietly connected the present to the family's past. Even the estate dogs enjoyed remarkably comfortable lives. Labradors accompanied hunting parties across fields. Spaniels slept peacefully beside drawing room fires, and terriers followed gardeners through orchards chasing rabbits or squirrels. Dogs often appeared in family portraits almost as proudly as their owners, reflecting the affection they received. Stable cats wandered confidently through barns, keeping mice away from valuable grain stores, while peacocks displayed shimmering feathers across lawns simply because they added beauty to the landscape. Music floated through the house almost every day. A daughter might practice Beethoven for an hour before lunch, while younger siblings quietly turned pages of sheet music. In another room, someone experimented with a violin or cello, filling hallways with gentle melodies. Even servants occasionally hummed popular songs while polishing silver or preparing bedrooms. The mansion itself seemed to breathe with quiet music from morning until evening. The greenhouse became one of the estate's greatest wonders. Heated throughout winter by underground pipes, it created a tropical paradise in the middle of the English countryside. Palm trees stretched toward glass ceilings, while orchids bloomed beside fragrant jasmine and brilliant hibiscus flowers. Lemons, oranges, figs, and even bananas sometimes ripened beneath carefully controlled conditions. Visitors stepping inside during a snowy January afternoon experienced the astonishing sensation of entering another climate entirely. Warm, humid air replaced icy winds, and exotic scents filled the atmosphere. Maintaining such a greenhouse demanded enormous expense, making it one of the clearest symbols of extraordinary wealth. Afternoons frequently passed without any particular agenda. Family members wandered through libraries selecting books almost at random before settling into comfortable chairs beside tall windows. Others painted landscapes, practiced embroidery, examined collections of fossils or butterflies, or simply strolled through gardens while discussing literature and travel. Unlike modern life, entertainment rarely depended upon constant excitement. The wealthy learned to appreciate long stretches of peaceful conversation, thoughtful reading, and quiet observation. One fascinating custom involved afternoon drives through the countryside. Elegant carriages rolled slowly along winding lanes bordered by ancient hedgerows, passing cottages covered in climbing roses and village churches whose stone towers had watched over the landscape for centuries. There was no urgent destination. The pleasure came simply from enjoying beautiful scenery, greeting familiar villagers, and breathing fresh country air. Sometimes the carriage stopped unexpectedly because someone had spotted particularly beautiful wildflowers or wished to admire an especially impressive sunset. The estate's kitchens represented astonishing organization. Menus were planned days in advance according to seasonal ingredients available from gardens, orchards, fisheries, dairies, and nearby farms. Cooks maintained notebooks recording every successful recipe, along with comments about improvements for future occasions. Certain desserts appeared only once each year, because family tradition demanded it. Favourite dishes prepared for birthdays, anniversaries, or Christmas became cherished memories repeated across generations. When distinguished visitors arrived, entire routines adjusted almost effortlessly. Extra servants appeared from neighbouring estates. Guest bedrooms filled with fresh flowers. Additional horses were prepared. The wine cellar was carefully searched for bottles appropriate to the occasion. Musicians received invitations. Florists delivered rare blooms. Yet, despite all this activity, guests witnessed only calm efficiency. The immense machinery operating behind the scenes remained almost completely invisible. As dusk approached, lamps gradually illuminated one room after another, before widespread electricity. This evening, ritual required remarkable coordination. Servants moved through hallways lighting hundreds of candles and gas lamps until warm golden light filled every occupied space. Shadows danced gently across carved ceilings and polished furniture, creating an atmosphere unlike anything produced by modern electric lighting. Even ordinary conversations seemed somehow softer beneath flickering candlelight. Dinner remained the social centerpiece of each day, yet what followed often became even more memorable. Families gathered in drawing rooms where someone selected music for the piano. Elderly relatives settled comfortably beside the fire, while younger guests played gentle card games or leafed through illustrated travel books. Occasionally, an explorer visiting from Africa described encounters with elephants or lions. A naval officer recounted storms encountered while crossing the Atlantic. A famous author discussed ideas for a forthcoming novel. Such evenings blended education, entertainment, and companionship in ways that modern life rarely replicates. Later, when the guests had retired and silence settled over the mansion, the house itself seemed almost timeless. Moonlight entered through tall windows, illuminating marble statues standing quietly in entrance halls. Portraits gazed solemnly from dark-panelled walls. Grandfather clocks continued marking each passing hour exactly as they had done for decades. Outside, deer wandered peacefully across moonlit lawns, while gentle mist drifted over ornamental lakes. The estate appeared less like a house than an entire world existing beyond ordinary time. Perhaps the greatest luxury was certainty. The family never wondered whether tomorrow's meals would be available, whether the roof might leak during a storm, whether winter fuel could be afforded, or whether illness would leave them homeless. Their wealth created an extraordinary sense of stability. Every generation inherited not merely money, but confidence that the estate, traditions, and way of life would continue much as they always had. Of course, history reminds us that no golden age lasts forever. The Victorian world would eventually give way to modern Britain, and many of these vast households would shrink or disappear entirely.